watching a calm, ordinary street at dusk when your phone buzzes with a news alert. Another body found. Familiar detail, same brutal precision, same remorseless signature. In that moment, you realize a predator moves unseen. In the heart of the Soviet Union, in the 1970s and 80s, one name became a whisper of terror. This is the story nobody wanted to believe, but it's real. And it's far more chilling than rumors. Before the sun sets on this tale, I promise you'll know who he was, not just the myth, but the reality. And yet, you won't find any map of his crimes until the very end. I won't let you peek behind the curtain too soon. So if you stay with me, you'll travel through silent villages, locked apartments, shaky testimonies, and only then will the pieces fall into place. Our story begins in the industrial haze of a late spring afternoon in 1976. A young woman steps off a bus, clutching her green shoulder bag. She's overwhelmed by the city's gray enormity. Inside that bag, nothing extraordinary, just small dreams of simple freedom. Moments later, a stranger offers help. He's polite, unremarkable, middle-aged, and confident. But beneath the surface, he holds a darkness no one could imagine. He guides her to a quiet courtyard. She thanks him, but he's no kind Samaritan. Within minutes, her world goes silent. No scream, no struggle, only the cold echo of metal. When her body is found hours later, the city panics. Another victim, strangled with surgical precision, no sign of robbery, no fingerprints. The community reels. Was it a serial killer? Impossible. Long thought banished by the mighty Soviet police. Yet here it was, proof. Over the next year, a pattern emerges. Small towns and cities report missing women, nurses, shop clerks, students, all gone without explanation. Then, bodies turn up in ditches, abandoned construction sites, beneath footbridges. The MO is consistent yet baffling. Bodies posed as if sleeping, clothing undisturbed. And each had been strangled or garroted with a cord thin enough to leave minimal bruising, a silent weapon wielded by someone confident of escape. What's striking is the intelligence behind each act. This was no mindless monster, no rampaging brute. He chose victims carefully, strangers, alone, in transit, hoping for help. He orchestrated each disappearance with calm precision. A glance, a diversion, a brief moment of trust. Then, execution. 1 minute they'd breathe. The next, the city held its breath. And with each news bulletin, panic deepened. Is he still out there? Who could be next? I'll spare you the names, except his nickname, whispered by terrified witnesses, the Barnaul Maniac. But names carry power. They conjure images. What I'm about to share contracts your breath, settles deep in your mind. Each murder reveals a new pebble in the mosaic of evil. In late autumn of 1977, in a remote Siberian bus stop, layered in frost, a young woman boarded a route bus. Somewhere between towns, she vanished. No witnesses, no suspects. She wasn't found until the thawed spring, her body aluminum cold and wrapped in the bus driver's blanket. Again, no robbery, no signs of assault beyond the kill. The authorities were stumped, but a growl of rumor swept across passengers. This was the work of a serial predator. Yet even the police began to see threads. The same cord, the same premeditated staging. They began to issue warnings, but crime moved faster than news. He moved faster than caution. By mid-1978, the tally reached 4 confirmed murders, 2 disappearances still unsolved. Still, the panic grew. In one region, couples stopped holding hands in public. Strangers eyed each other with suspicion. One chilling episode stands apart. In the dawn of February '79, a university student walks home from a library. Streetlights sputter above her. A man in a dark coat approaches, offering directions. She freezes, wondering if she's being mugged. He takes her arm, shifts her toward a side alley. No scream, no struggle, just that final, silent moment. That morning, her roommate found the news. Found dead near the old power station. The neighbors said they heard no cries over the night's hush. And the police confided, "We can't link fingerprints. The body shows calculated staging. he's becoming more daring. This wasn't random brutality. He selected the time, the place, the context, pulled each victim from the safety of anonymity into his web. The more the authorities tighten the net, the more entwined their fingers become. Each failed investigation emboldens him. Between 79 and 80, there was a lull. No confirmed murders in months. Was it over? Was it safe? Then, in spring 1980, 2 bodies are discovered in a rimmer's shallow waters. One is a nurse, missing for 3 weeks. The other, a troubled student who attended her funeral. Both strangled. Both left with eerily calm composition. It wasn't just aberration. It was orchestrated cruelty. As if he left a message, "I'm still here." In mid-1980, there was the case that almost caught him. A waitress reported a man following her late. She ducked into a cafe. He paused, then vanished into the night. Her description, a man in a trench coat, unremarkable face, led to a rough sketch, radioed to patrols. For days, they combed bus stations across Omsk to Tomsk. Nothing. Then, the trail went cold. No prints, no surveillance, no vehicle. The sketch? Easily dismissed as someone else's worry. He became a ghost in a live city. Listen, you're thinking, is he caught yet? Not even close. His boldest move came next, a double murder in a dusty village outside Barnaul. 2 sisters, alone at home. One night, their doorbell rings. 2 men claiming delivery. They're spooked, but let them in, because what else do you do? Inside, the men's friendly facade falters. Blunt instruments. They end both lives swiftly. Bodies found sprawled in floral carpet dust, a single rose stem on the hearth, footprints wiped clean. The authorities called it a robbery, but no valuables were disturbed. This was signature, scene, symbol, a taunt. Then the killer vanished again. Silence, a hush so unnerving that people whispered about curses. Parents began walking their daughters to work. Bus conductors inspected each passenger. Farmers patrolled roads with shotguns. Everyone looked over their shoulder. The killer's legend had grown far beyond any body count. Bars emptied early. Courtyards locked at dusk. No one slept soundly. From 1981 to 1983, a few more victims, still mostly missing women, found posed and strangled. But authorities uncovered something disturbing. In one case, police autopsy discovered evidence of torture prior to death. Nail marks, bruises, the cord used for strangulation that left telltale tool marks. This wasn't impulsive murder. This was ritual. This was rage and control. Focused, personal, satisfying only to him. Now the pressure mounts. The killer, if he exists in a single psyche, knows the net tightens. Yet he strolls into bus terminals, visits crowded pharmacies. One elderly pharmacist would later say, "There was something in his eyes, normal man, but cold, like he watched my pulse, waited for me to breathe." They still don't know his face. They still don't know his name. All that survived, the cord, the posed body, the silence. So let me ask you, what does this silence say? It echoes louder than any scream. It warns us, evil hides in convenience, in kindness, in patience. Now imagine it's your daughter's last evening walk. What makes you sense danger? What leaves you dead silent? Keep that thought, because there's more, much more. The killer escalates, the pattern warps, and you'll discover all at once that horrors can evolve when empathy dies and cruelty blooms. By now, his list of confirmed victims stands at 8. Another 4, unconfirmed but suspicious, are whispered off the record. The trail reaches across bus routes, across seasons, and the police feel the pressure to announce, this was one man, but they cannot. They still cannot. And yet, in every case, there is one piece of repeated evidence, a thread of silk fiber found only in the double murder scene, rare, expensive. The police suspect he worked in a textile factory or luxury tailor chain. But still, no paper trail. Just that whisper of silk between grimy evidence bags. A ghost with a stitch. So here we stand, you're deep into this story. You've already felt the coldness in each staged scene. You've already wondered who he is, where he hides. You're reading the names, some known, some lost. You can feel dread. And yet there is more to come. An explosion of violence, a narrow escape, and a final twist that no one saw coming. In the next part, we'll follow that silk thread deeper. We'll track how investigators finally narrowed their search to a suspect, and we'll step ever so quietly into the mind of the man known on the streets as the Barnaul Maniac. But first, I leave you with this. Imagine that green shoulder bag again. Imagine handing it to a stranger. Imagine that instant when you realize trust was a lie. Keep watching, because the nightmare is only beginning. You're still here. Good. Because this is where the story stops pretending to be about someone else's nightmare and starts knocking on your own door. After those first murders, the city changed. The Barnaul streets, once noisy, filled with gossip, school children, grandmothers clutching their bags, grew tense, anxious. The invisible clock ticked with each dusk. People invented reasons to rush home before the lights dimmed. Mothers grew hawk-eyed, husbands more protective. But it wasn't enough. The killer was a ghost among shadows, moving as if he could read minds. No two murders happened in exactly the same place or the same way. He learned, adapted, became a master of disguise, not with costumes, but with ordinary manners, blending into the gray mass of Soviet life. Detectives from the local militia, then the district, then the regional headquarters, all tried to draw lines on a map. It didn't work. The lines led nowhere, just fear radiating out from each body, each fresh victim, like cracks in glass. The press tried to keep it quiet. The Soviet state loathed panic and disorder, especially in small cities far from Moscow's gaze. But rumors don't need a permit. Panic seeped through kitchens and market stalls. People started describing a figure in the corner of their eye, mid-height, neat hair, polite voice, always offering to help. But let's pause. Imagine you're one of those detectives. You have a wall full of photos, victims young and old, city and village, day and night. Some killed with a fine cord, some with hands. Some found days after, others after weeks. No sexual violence, nothing stolen, only that eerie, controlled violence. You ask yourself, what sort of monster doesn't break character? What kind of man keeps killing with the same patience, the same tidiness, never slips, never boasts? Now you notice something else. He sometimes stopped. Months passed, then even a year. No bodies, no missing girls. Hope flickered. Life felt safe again. But it was false hope. He was only perfecting his game. In late 1983, Barnaul itself, now thick with unspoken fear, was shaken by a new tragedy. A little girl, not even 10 years old, failed to come home from school. Her mother reported her missing before midnight. For days, police scoured the city, drains, sheds, parks, courtyards. When her body was found in a drainage ditch, a heavy silence fell. This was new. Until now, he targeted women, teenagers, grown adults. Now, a child. The city reeled. The local authorities wanted to cover up the murder, but word leaked fast. People asked, is it the same killer? Police refused to answer, but the signs were there. Strangulation, the careful staging, no robbery, no assault. Something had shifted. Was it a new killer? Or was the Barnaul Maniac growing bolder, colder, less predictable? Theories blossomed. Maybe he was in the military, his discipline, the efficiency of his kills. Maybe he was a doctor, the way he left no fingerprints, no wild wounds. Maybe he was two men, even a gang. But the truth was worse. It was one man, smarter than anyone guessed, watching the investigation as closely as the crimes themselves. Let's talk about one of the most terrifying murders. Early winter, 1984. Heavy snow muffled the city. An office worker, Tatiana, stayed late, typing her report in a government building. She stepped into the dark corridor, careful of each echo. As she walked down the stairs, a man waited by the exit, pretending to fix his scarf. She never made it home. Her body was found 3 days later, in the city outskirts. The same marks on her neck, her shoes neatly placed beside her, no signs of a struggle. The police were stumped. This was the center of Barnaul, the administrative heart, with guards on every corner. No witnesses, no suspects. This time, a witness remembered a face. A man with a soft, polite smile, carrying a bag with a logo from a local textile factory. The police had something to go on. They started interviewing workers, checking alibis, quietly watching the factory gates at shift changes. Hundreds of men were questioned, fingerprints taken. No matches. The killer vanished again, like mist. But this clue, the textile connection, would echo later, when they needed it most. Then came the attacks that broke the city's nerves for good. A series of brutal murders, all in public places, during daylight. One in a park, one near a tram stop, one even on the edge of a schoolyard, as if daring anyone to intervene. The killer seemed to feed on the city's fear, thriving on each headline, each frantic mother. His methods were never exactly the same. Sometimes he used a cord, sometimes his bare hands. Sometimes he left a flower, a scrap of silk, a twisted piece of wire, tiny trophies, only for himself. Rumors swirled. Was he insane? A sadist? A genius? Some said the killer could hypnotize with his eyes, that he wore gloves made from the skin of his victims. The truth was far more ordinary and far more terrifying. He was quiet, self-contained, unremarkable in every way but one. He killed for the pleasure of control. That was his art, his only joy. Police began to see the pattern, but they couldn't prove it. They brought in psychiatrists, specialists, even parapsychologists from Moscow, each building a psychological profile. He's a loner, they said. Probably lives alone, maybe with a pet. No close friends, no family ties. Good with his hands, maybe an engineer or a skilled worker. Smart enough to read the news and stay ahead of the investigation. Calm enough to disappear for months, then strike when the city least expects it. But the truth was, he could have been anyone. Your neighbor, your colleague, the man who fixed your leaking pipe. Evil had become invisible, part of the landscape. People stopped trusting each other. Barnaul felt like a city under siege, not from an army, but from an idea, that anyone could be next. And then, another twist. In the summer of 1984, a survivor, a young woman, Irina, fought back. He tried to strangle her in the stairwell of her apartment block, but she managed to scratch his face, tear off a button, and scream so loud the neighbors came running. The attacker fled, leaving behind a glove and a thread of silk, matching the kind found at earlier crime scenes. Irina's description was vague. He wore a cap, kept his face in shadow, but her resistance broke the spell. For the first time, the city believed the killer could be beaten. The police doubled down. They set up decoys, undercover officers posing as vulnerable women watching public spaces, trailing suspects. They staked out factories and bus stations, checked every incoming worker, scrutinized every minor criminal in the region. But the killer changed again, vanished for almost a year, lying low while the city tried to heal. But the damage was done. Women stopped traveling alone. Men checked in with their wives, their girlfriends every hour. Even the weather seemed colder, the air sharper. The city learned to live with dread. In 1985, there was another murder, this one even more brazen. A woman in her 30s, waiting for a trolley bus at dawn, approached by a man who asked for the time. She replied. He smiled, reached out as if to touch her shoulder, and in a single motion, garroted her, dragged her behind a billboard. The murder happened in full view of an apartment block, yet nobody saw the act, only the aftermath. It was as if he could bend light, shift the world around himself, exist in a moment of darkness where nobody looked. And then another body, and another. Each killing seemed to twist the knife further into the city's nerves. Still, the authorities failed to link the evidence. Each crime so carefully planned, each scene so meticulously cleaned. The press dared not print the word maniac, but it was whispered everywhere. Eventually, the police tried something desperate. They published an anonymous letter in the local paper, supposedly from a victim's family, begging the killer to stop. They hoped it would lure him out, force a mistake, provoke a confession. Instead, the killings slowed. Maybe he was watching, reading, laughing at their desperation. Maybe he felt powerful enough now to pause. Or maybe he was planning something worse. You, the listener, might wonder, where does this end? How much terror can a city absorb before it breaks? How do you hunt a ghost in the Soviet winter, with no computers, no surveillance, no help from Moscow? The answer is, with patience, with dread, with the hope that one day a single mistake will shatter the illusion and bring the killer into the light. But the Barnaul Maniac was not ready to be caught, not yet. He had more to prove, he had more fear to sow, and as the investigation dragged on, one thing became clear. The monster was not just a legend, not just a rumor. He was real, alive, and watching. And the city of Barnaul, paralyzed by dread, was still waiting for the nightmare to end. The years passed, but the fear never faded. By the mid-80s, the Barnaul Maniac had become more than a rumor. He was a stain on the soul of the city, a silent shadow following every woman after dark. He was the whispered threat behind every locked door, the dread that made even grown men look over their shoulders as dusk approached. The police tried to reassure the public, to promise safety, but nobody truly believed them. After all, the killer was still out there, invisible, clever, always a step ahead. What do you do when evil is so ordinary, so quietly woven into the city's fabric, that it could be anyone? People began to doubt even those closest to them. Husbands eyed their wives' co-workers. Mothers warned their daughters never to trust a helpful stranger. The city was suffocating in suspicion, and that was just the way the killer liked it. His greatest weapon was not the garrote or the silken cord, but the invisible fear that grew with every new headline, every fresh grave. But as the fear grew, so did the resolve to catch him. Barnaul's militia officers began to work around the clock, driven by the humiliation of failure and the anger of helplessness. They pored over old files, mapped every murder, traced every train ticket and bus fare. They tried to find patterns in the chaos, victims' ages, professions, habits, routes home. Yet the answers remained slippery, and the killer seemed to vanish whenever they got close. Then came the turning point, a fresh wave of killings, this time with a new boldness. No longer content to strike at the edges of society, the Barnaul Maniac began to hunt in the city center, broad daylight, crowded markets, places no killer should dare to tread. The murders grew even more brazen, almost theatrical. In one case, a woman was attacked while shopping at a bustling bazaar, her body found behind a curtain of crates less than 20 meters from where her friends were waiting. Another victim was pulled from a tram stop in full view of passing traffic. Still, no one saw anything. Each crime scene was like a stage after the final act, silent, chilling, meticulously cleaned. It was during these months that the city's fear tipped into hysteria. There were curfews, false alarms, neighbors accusing each other, mobs forming in the night to chase down anyone who looked out of place. The authorities, desperate to restore control, rounded up dozens of suspects: drunks, vagrants, the mentally ill. Some confessions were beaten out, but the killings didn't stop. The real monster was still out there, blending in, feeding on the chaos he'd created. Meanwhile, inside the police department, a special unit was formed. Every detective, every forensic specialist, every psychologist who could be spared was brought in. The pressure was immense. Moscow was watching now, demanding answers, threatening careers. The chief investigator, a man named Eerie, obsessed over every detail, sleeping in his office, haunted by dreams of women's faces he could not save. He began to notice the killer's evolving pattern. The early murders had been almost gentle, a strangulation and careful posing. But now the violence was sharper, more chaotic. Some victims showed signs of resistance, of being overpowered and brutalized before death. Others were found with cryptic objects beside them: a child's toy, a lock of hair, a scrap of newspaper folded into a heart. It was as if the killer was communicating, leaving clues only he understood. This was not random madness. This was calculated, purposeful. An escalation, as if the killer was growing restless, reckless, desperate to be seen. Yuri and his team began to realize something chilling. They weren't just hunting a murderer. They were engaged in a battle of wits, a dark game with no rules and no guarantee of victory. Then a letter arrived at the police station. Anonymous, typed but unmistakably personal. It mocked the investigation, taunted Yuri by name, described details of the latest crime that only the killer could know. "You chase your own tail," it said. "You are as blind as your city. I am always beside you." The letter ended with a single line: "When you catch me, you will know why." That was when Yuri understood the true horror. They weren't just hunting a killer, but a man who wanted to be understood, to be famous, even if only to his pursuers. The killer watched the city through the eyes of a predator and saw only prey. As the investigation deepened, they began to narrow the field. They cross-checked every worker from the textile factory, then every man who'd moved to Barnaul in the previous decade. They dug into mental hospital records, criminal files, even school disciplinary reports. One name began to appear, always on the fringes, always with an alibi, always just out of reach. But even as they closed in, the killer slipped away. Another woman was killed, then another, each murder more frenzied, less controlled. It was as if the maniac sensed the net tightening and responded with fury, and all the while, the city trembled. People locked their doors and windows, kept their children close, prayed for the nightmare to end. And still, the killer's greatest disguise was his normality. He had a job, a modest apartment, polite manners. Neighbors described him as quiet, helpful, even kind. No one would have guessed what lurked beneath the surface. He moved through Barnaul like a ghost, invisible in the crowd, carrying the tools of death in a simple leather bag. For Yuri, the hunt became an obsession. He followed the suspect at night, watched his building from parked cars, trailed him through snowy alleys. He grew convinced that this was the man, the Barnaul Maniac, hiding in plain sight, but without proof. Without a confession, he could do nothing. Then a break. In the autumn of 1986, a young woman managed to escape after being attacked in the stairwell of her building. She described her attacker: a man with cold eyes, a familiar walk, the smell of machine oil on his coat. She remembered the glint of a badge clipped to his pocket, the kind given to factory workers for good service. It was enough for Yuri. He ordered a stakeout, surveillance, and finally, the man was arrested. But the story does not end here, because even as the police celebrated, as the city dared to hope, questions remained. Had they truly caught the right man? Was the nightmare finally over? Or had they only scratched the surface of something darker, something more terrifying than anyone could imagine? That's a question only the final act can answer. And the final act, as you'll see, was even stranger than anyone dared believe. If you think the story is nearly over, you're mistaken. Arresting a suspect is one thing, proving guilt is another. The city of Barnaul was holding its breath, balancing between relief and suspicion. People wanted to believe the nightmare was over, but doubt lingered like smoke after a fire. For the police, the real test was just beginning. Interrogations began the same day. The man, calm, polite, even cooperative, never raised his voice. He asked for water, answered questions, told stories about his childhood. At first glance, he was perfectly ordinary. But beneath the surface, detectives sensed an icy self-control, an absence of fear that was almost inhuman. Yuri, exhausted but relentless, tried everything. Gentle questions, harsh threats, appeals to conscience. Days turned to weeks. The suspect denied everything. Outside the interrogation room, the city waited. Newspapers were still forbidden to print the details, but everyone knew something huge was happening. Women eyed the men in their lives with fresh uncertainty. Neighbors whispered about the quiet man from the factory, the way he always kept to himself. Some said he'd once rescued a stray dog. Others swore they'd seen him lurking in courtyards late at night, always alone. The forensic team worked overtime, combing through old evidence. They tested fibers, hair, skin cells, anything that could link the suspect to the crime scenes. They found matches, a single strand of silk, identical to the thread found clutched in a victim's hand. A button from the suspect's coat, lost during a struggle. Fake fingerprints, smeared but distinctive, on the handle of a kitchen knife. Piece by piece, the case came together, not just as a list of horrors, but as a portrait of methodical, compulsive evil. But even as the net tightened, the suspect remained maddeningly calm. Sometimes he smiled, as if enjoying the attention. Other times, he sat for hours in silence, eyes fixed on a point far beyond the room. Psychologists called him a classic predator, emotionally dead, motivated by domination, not impulse. He confessed to nothing, but his presence seemed to fill the room with an unnatural cold. Meanwhile, Yuri found himself haunted by doubt. What if they were wrong? What if the real killer was still free? After all, the city's terror had become a living thing, a monster of its own. And there were still unsolved murders, killings that didn't fit the suspect's pattern, disappearances no one could explain. Was there a copycat, an accomplice? Or was the Barnaul Maniac simply beyond human comprehension, his crimes deeper and more numerous than anyone knew? Pressure from Moscow mounted. The ministry wanted a resolution, a confession, a headline. But the killer, if he was sitting in that cell, offered nothing but silence. Then a breakthrough, almost by accident. A forensic technician noticed a pattern in the wounds on several victims. A tiny, almost invisible cut behind the left ear. It was a signature, a mark only the true killer would know. When confronted, the suspect finally reacted. His hands began to shake. He asked for a lawyer. It was the first crack in his mask. In the following days, his resolve began to falter. He admitted to being at the scenes of several attacks, but insisted he had only tried to help. He remembered every detail, the weather, the victim's clothes, the exact words they'd spoken before they died. It was the memory of a hunter, not a bystander. Still, he refused to admit the trial was a spectacle, even by Soviet standards. Guards stood outside the courthouse, holding back crowds desperate for answers. Journalists from Moscow jostled for space, hungry for the details of Barnaul's long nightmare. The courtroom was filled with the families of the victims, women who hadn't slept in years, men whose hands shook with anger. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber as the charges were read. Multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, assault, and more. The suspect sat motionless, barely blinking. Witness after witness took the stand. Survivors described his voice, his eyes, the way he blended into the crowd. Forensic experts described the silk thread, the bruises, the hidden cuts behind the ear. Each detail built the story higher, brick by brick, until the weight of evidence seemed overwhelming. And yet, through it all, the killer remained enigmatic. Sometimes he smirked, as if the whole thing were a game. Other times, he seemed to vanish into himself, disappearing into a memory no one else could access. The public wanted rage, vengeance, closure. But the trial only deepened the sense of mystery, the feeling that the city had been living with a kind of evil too complex to fully grasp. The verdict came quickly, guilty on all counts. The judge's sentence was harsh, the words falling like stones in the silent room. But there was no sense of victory. No one cheered. The families of the victims wept, not from relief, but from exhaustion. They had lived with horror so long that even justice felt hollow. And still, questions remained. Some investigators believed there were more victims, hidden graves in the forests beyond Barnaul, secrets that would never be found. Others wondered if the city itself had been changed, scarred forever by fear and suspicion. Yuri, his mission complete, found no peace. He knew that true evil is not always locked behind bars. Sometimes it survives in memory, in nightmare, in the everyday silence that settles after a storm. Barnaul returned to its routines. Children playing in courtyards, women walking to work, laughter returning to the markets. But the city was not the same. It never could be. For those who had lived through the terror, the face of the maniac was everywhere. On the bus, in the crowd, reflected in the window as dusk fell. Because in the end, the real story was never just about a killer. It was about a city learning to live with fear, a community forced to question its own trust, a society that discovered how thin the line is between normality and nightmare. The Barnaul Maniac had been caught, but his shadow lingered long after the cell door closed. Years have passed since the verdict, but for many, the wounds never truly healed. Barnaul tried to forget. New buildings rose where the old nightmares had unfolded. Streets were repaved, playgrounds rebuilt, fresh paint covering old stains. But every city has its ghosts. And in Barnaul, the shadow of the maniac was always there, flickering at the edges of memory. The suspect, the man who had been just another face in the crowd, sat behind bars, cut off from the world he once terrorized. Some said he grew old quickly, his eyes dulling, his shoulders stooping, the weight of his crimes finally settling on his bones. Others whispered that he remained cold and unrepentant, a predator caged but never tamed. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. He was not a monster from a legend, but a man, one who had learned to hide in plain sight, to pass unnoticed, to become whatever the world needed him to be. For the families of the victims, closure proved elusive. Some tried to move on, building new lives in other cities, far from the haunted streets of Barnaul. Others clung to memories, returning again and again to the places where their loved ones had vanished, searching for meaning in every broken detail. At memorials and gravesites, tears mixed with anger and regret. So many questions still unanswered, so many lives forever changed. Yuri, the lead investigator, was promoted, then quietly retired. He never spoke publicly about the case again, but those who knew him said the nightmares never left. In quiet moments, he could be found standing alone on dark street corners, watching the world with wary eyes, as if he was waiting for something, a feeling perhaps that evil could return at any moment, wearing a different face. The city tried to heal. There were new festivals, new love stories, even new legends, parents warning their children not to trust strangers, teachers reminding their students that the world can change in an instant. But there was a new caution too, a deeper awareness of the shadows we all carry, the strangers among us, the parts of ourselves we hope never to reveal. And what about the maniac himself? In prison, he became a legend, a cautionary tale for guards, a topic of rumor for new inmates. Some said he spent his days writing letters to no one, reliving his crimes in perfect detail, savoring the control he could no longer exert on the world outside. Others said he refused to speak at all, sitting in his cell for hours, staring at the wall, lost in memories only he could understand. But the truth, the real, unsettling truth, is that monsters like him are rare, but not unique. There is no perfect system, no set of rules that can prevent all evil from slipping through the cracks. Sometimes the darkness walks beside us, masked by a polite smile or an ordinary job, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And sometimes, when the world feels safe again, that's when we're most vulnerable. For Barnaul, the maniac's crimes became a lesson etched in blood and fear. Trust is fragile, safety is never guaranteed, and evil is almost always more ordinary than we want to believe. The city changed, the people changed, but the questions remained. How well do we really know those around us? What secrets hide in the quiet apartments, the busy factories, the silent corridors of our own lives? What would it take for someone to become a monster, and could we even see it coming? The story ends not with justice, not with revenge, but with a city learning to live with what it cannot understand. In the silence after the storm, Barnaul moved forward, scarred but standing, wary but unbroken. The maniac's name faded from headlines, replaced by new tragedies, new triumphs, new stories. But for those who lived through the terror, one lesson remained. Sometimes, the scariest monsters are not the ones we find in nightmares, but the ones we pass on the street every day, never suspecting what hides behind their eyes. And as dusk settles once again over Barnaul, a mother calls her child home, a man locks his door, and the city listens for echoes, for footsteps, for the silence that follows when true evil has finally passed by.
Don't scroll past. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready for the next twisted story.